Hello again, and welcome back to Educator.com's Advanced PHP with MySQL course. In today's lesson, we're going to be continuing development of our web application, incorporating what we learned in our last lesson about linking tables. Basically, what we learned in our last lesson was how to set up our database so that it can handle departments. And basically, what we have done is created two tables in our database, a departments table and a departments underscore items table, to store all of the information about a department. And the departments underscore items table is our linking table, and that's where we use to keep entries of associating items with a particular department. So what we're going to be doing today in our version 16.0 of the web application is we're going to be officially moving all of our web application functionality that deals with departments out of this departments.txt file and the functions that operate on that were in filelib.php, and basically moving everything into the MySQL database. And how we're going to do that is we're going to be implementing some more methods in our database access class that's basically going to allow us to add items to our store, add items to a department in the store, and then also to be able to retrieve department information from the store. So for example, we know two types of SQL statements so far. We know about insert statements as the first one. So we're going to learn how to insert a department into the store using an insert statement. Then as a separate operation, we're going to learn how to add an item to a department. So basically what's going to happen is in our insert department, let me erase this, in our insert department functionality, we're just going to be inserting a row into the departments table. And as we saw in our last lesson, the departments table just has the department ID and the name of the department. And then all of the items in the store are contained in the departments underscore items table. So this method here, add item to department, is actually going to be inserting a row into the departments underscore items table. What that's going to allow us to do is to associate a particular item ID with a particular department ID, essentially adding that item to the department. So basically, between these two types of insert statements we're going to be able to add a department and add items to it. Now what that means is the information for a department is going to be spread across two different tables. So we're going to, in our second type of query that we know about, our select queries, we're going to have a couple of methods that are going to have to make use of that knowledge that the department information is spread over two tables. So for example, we're going to have a getDepartment method, which is going to have to know that it's actually going to have to run two queries to load a department object. It's going to have to run a query on the departments table to be able to load the name and department ID of a particular department. And then it's also going to have to run a query on departments underscore items tables to be able to load all of the item IDs of the items in that particular department. GetDepartments is going to work in the same way, except it's just going to load, to create department objects for all of the departments in an array. So it's going to be running multiple sets of select queries. IsItemInDepartment is a method we're going to be using that's actually just going to run on it's a query we're going to run on the departments underscore items table. And basically what it's going to allow us to do is to see whether a item is in a particular department. So basically we provided this method a department ID and an item ID, which are pairs or comprise rows in our departments items table, and it's basically just going to check to see if a pair like this exists in that table, and if it does, that means that the item's in the department. We're also, like for our item object that we have in our department store, we're going to create a department exists function, which is basically going to run a select query. In this particular case, it's just going to run it on the departments table, and it's just going to basically check to see if a department with the particular department ID exists in our store. So let's take a look at the database access class and the updates that we've made to that in order to see these new functions that we talked about. So I'll blow this up a little bit. So first of all, in our last version of database access, we had a getItem. Besides the constructor and destructor, we had four other methods, public methods. We had a getItem, a getItems method, which were used to retrieve an item from the database, which basically called select queries, a single select query on the items table, and that's because all the information about an item is stored in that single table, whereas for our departments, it's actually stored across two tables. We have the insert item method, which just performs an insert query on our items table, and then items exist is the method that would test if an item exists in our database simply by searching to see if a row exists with a particular item ID in the items table. So in our new version of database access, we have a number of additional methods. So we have two get methods, as we just mentioned on the slides. We have a get department method and a get departments method that are going to load either respectively a single department from the database or an array of all of the departments in the database. And the way that they're going to do that is they're actually both going to have to run two select queries per department. You're going to have to run, as mentioned, one select query on the departments table to get the name and the ID of the table, and then another on the departments underscore items linking table to be able to build up an array of all of the item IDs that are contained in a particular department. So those are sort of the analogs of get item and get items. In the same way, we have an insert department function, which is an analog for the insert item department. We have department exists, which is just like items exist. We have is item in department, which, as we just mentioned, is something that doesn't really have an analog for an item, but it basically, as mentioned, just tests if an item's in a department. And then we've also added this add item to department method, which basically is going to create a pair in that linking table that's going to link an item to a particular department. So first off, let's look at the insert department function, or method, excuse me. And basically what this does is it takes a department object, and then it's going to extract the information from that department object, create an insert query, and insert a row into the departments table. So the only thing that's really in our departments table, and actually if I have a MySQL, if I load up the MySQL monitor, oops, and I describe our departments table, we can see that it basically has two columns. It has a name column and a department ID. So when we're inserting a row or a department into this departments table, we're basically going to be just providing it a name, because it's going to auto-generate this department ID because it's an auto-increment column. So when we call this insert department function, we pass it a department object. Basically what it's going to do is build up an insert query that's going to insert into the departments. It's going to provide null for our department ID, and that's because the table generates that automatically whenever you provide a null or a zero value for an auto-increment column. And then we're also going to provide the name of the department that was provided as part of the object, the department object supplied to this method. Just as we did for inserting an item, we log the query, we run the query, we're able to get the number of rows that were affected, which for a successful insert in this particular case is going to be 1. And then we also are able to extract using the insert ID property of that MySQLi object class. We're able to get the insert ID of our row of the department that was inserted. So basically, as long as one row was returned and the insert ID was generated, meaning it wasn't equal to 0, we're not going to output an error message, and instead we're going to basically update that department object, provide it that new insert ID that was generated for it. So now we have our department object that's going to have a name and its ID, and then we return the department object to the calling script. So that's how we add a department to the or basically add a row to the departments table. Now, if we want to add items to a particular department, we have a script that we've been using in the past called add item to department.php, where you have a drop-down box where you can select an item and a department, and you can put the two together. Well, we have now we have a method specifically for doing that called add item to department, and basically what that's going to do is, because it's linking an item to a particular department, and we know that that information is stored in that linking table departments underscore items, we're going to be creating an insert statement, but it's going to be an insert statement in that departments underscore items linking table. So basically this method takes a department ID and an item ID as parameters. It checks to make sure that both of those items exist in the database. It checks to make sure that the item already isn't in the department using this function that we had mentioned that was developed in this version of the web application, which basically just tests if that pair already exists in the department's items table. If it already exists, it's just going to return true. And then if it doesn't already exist, both the item and the department exist in the database, it's going to create this insert query. And as you can see here, our insert query basically is saying insert a row into the departs underscore items linking table that has comprised of the department ID and item pair that was provided to this function. Then we go ahead and we, because it's an insert query, we run the query using the query method. We don't need to find out the number of rows that were returned. We can just test, this query method will just return true or false on whether the insert was successful or not, because we're not really interested, there's no insert ID that we're interested in, there's no auto increment column. We can just test that query return true. If it returned true, then we return true from this method saying it was successfully added to the department. If not, we're going to log an error and then return false saying that the item couldn't be added to the department. So that's how we add a department to our database, and then also that's how we add items to our department. So now that we have a department in our database, one of the things that we want to do is check if a department exists. And simply the way that we've done that is the same way that we do that is the same way we did for an item. We just write a query on the departments table, just asking if a row exists where the department ID is equal to a particular department ID. If it returns a row, that means then that department does exist in the database, and we can return true or false. And so that's how that works. Now, getDepartment is going to be a little more complicated because, as mentioned, we have the data for a department spread across two different tables. It's spread across the departments table, and then it's also spread across the linking table departments items. We know a department object has three properties. It has a department ID, it has a name, and it has an array called items that is an indexed array of basically all of the item IDs of all the items in that particular department. So in order to get a department from the database, we need to build up that department object, and that's what this getDepartment function is going to return. It's going to return a built-up object that's going to include the department ID, the name of the department, and then also all of those that array of all of the items in the department. So we're actually going to have to run two select queries. The first select query we run is on the departments table, and we're basically saying give us a row in the table where the department ID matches the department we're trying to load. As long as it returns we run the query and then just test to make sure that that one row was returned, because it's a primary key. Our department ID is a primary key, so we should only be getting one row. Assuming that's true, then we have to take another step. We know that the department exists in the departments table. Now we need to find out if there are any items already in the department. So basically what we do is we create another select query, and in this query we're just saying give us the item ID column, all the values in the item ID column from the departments underscore items linking table that have the department ID of the department we're searching for. So we're basically saying give us all the row. For example, if we want to find all the items in department 1, we're saying give us the value of the item ID column for any rows that have the department ID equal to 1. So for example, if we take a look at the data in departments items, we can see, for example, that our department ID 1 has two item IDs associated with it, 1001 and 1004. So what our query here that we were just looking at was select item ID from our linking table if we wanted for department 1, for example. So we're saying give us all of the item IDs in a result set from this linking table that are associated with where the column department ID equals 1. So we have two rows that are here, so we're going to get a result set that should have 1001 and 1004 in it, and sure enough, when we run the query, that's what's going to happen. So that's what this query is going to do in our getDepartment function. We're going to run the query, and then it's going to return a result set, and that result set is going to be that MySQLi underscore result object that allows you to call the fetch object method on it, or fetch array method that allows you to parse over, basically loop over each row returned in the result set. So what we're going to be able to do is loop over each row and then pull out all the item IDs that are associated with that particular department. Well, like for our getItem method, we have a private helper function within database access class that we created called buildDepartment from rows. And basically what it does is it builds up a department object from the row returned when we ran this first query that gives us the name and department ID of the department, and then also when we run the second query that's going to get the item IDs of all the items in the department, that returns a result set object. We're going to pass that to this item as well. I mean, to this department, excuse me, to this method as well. So what's going to happen is this private helper function is going to be able to extract information from the first query and then also extract all the item IDs from the result set of the second query. If we actually go and look at the source code for this file so we can see the private method, we can see that build department from rows. Basically what it does is it tests to see if any rows exist in that item's result set, meaning were there any actual items in the department. If not, it just goes ahead and returns a department object that contains the ID obtained from the row that was returned from the department's table query and the name that was returned from the department's row query, and then an empty array for the items because no items are in it. If that's not true, then what it does is it's going to loop over that result set, the items result set that contains all the items IDs of all of the items in the department. And basically what it's going to do is just going to add, it's going to create this items array in which it's going to add the item ID of each row in that result set. So each row is going to have an item ID for each item in the department. So items will be built up. For Department 1, for example, items is going to contain two values. It's going to contain 1001 and 1004. And then now we return a department object that has the ID and name that were extracted from the department row query results, and then also it's going to have set as its items property that items array. We're going to have it set to this built-up array that we were able to build from our second query on the department's items table. So get departments works the same way as our get items does. It basically goes through and it runs a query on, instead of on the items table, on the departments table, and it's able to load all of the departments, a row for each department in the store. And basically all we're going to do is, assuming that departments exist in the database, we're basically going to create an array of department objects and then basically replicate what we did in the get department method that we just talked about. For each department that was, for each row in the department's table, we're going to go ahead and build up a department object. We're going to call the build department from rows helper function again. We're going to pass it the row from the department's table for each department, and then we're also going to pass it the result set again from that second query on our department's items table. It's going to build up this items array and then return it. And we're going to use that in a number of different spots. For example, in our left-hand navigation bar, we call it in our admin header, or excuse me, header.phtml. That actually loads up. It calls this get departments method to load up all the department objects to be able to list a link to each department. It's also called on store.php. In the middle of the page, we have a list of all the departments. And then also in our admin site, when we have these drop-down boxes that list all the departments, that's where it's going to be used as well. So those are all the different methods that we basically added to move this department information into these two tables in our database, to be able to insert department information and then to be able to extract it. So now we're going to talk about the scripts where this is actually used. So first off, there's a script created called adddepartment.php. It's a new admin page that we've created that's going to allow us to add a new department to the store database. And as mentioned, it's going to basically it's going to be calling this insert department function, which, as we learned, doesn't add any items to a particular department. It just adds a row to the department's table. So it's only going to actually take one value. It's going to take a name. So if we actually go and look at our new administrator site, there's a new link for add department. And basically it allows us to enter the name of a new department that we want. So for example, if we look at the store, we refresh the home page, the current status of the store is there are 3 different departments in the store. And if we run a select query on the departments table, we can see that there are 3 departments in the store right now. Well, with our new add department page that's going to call this add department function, we can create a new department. We'll call it shoes, and we can add the department, or let's say winter clothes. When we add the department to the store, it's going to let us know that it was added, it was assigned department 4, now we actually go back and run our departments query again. We're going to see that it's been added to our departments table. When we go to view the store homepage again, we're going to see it's been added to our homepage and then also to the left nav bar. And then when we click on it, it'll take us to that department page. And right now, it's going to show a table with no items in it, and that's because we haven't added any items to the store. All we've done is created that row in the departments table. Well, we've updated our add item to department function to be able to add a row into that department's items linking table. So let's add, for example, the winter jacket to the new winter clothes department, which you can see shows up in this drop-down box. And when we add it to the department, it's going to let us know that it was successfully added. If we go back to the store, we refresh the winter clothes page, we can see that it's now in there. So basically what's happening is our add department script is calling the insert department method. Our add item to department script is calling the add item to department method, which inserts a department ID item ID pair within that linking table. Our store pages, they're going to be calling the get departments method, which is going to load all of the departments from the database up. That's going to allow them to output links for them. And then we're also going to be able to, when we go to, for example, department.php for department ID equals 4, we're going to be able to load a department. It's going to call it a get department function that we just created to load a department from the database, which is going to get its name from the departments table and then all of the items in it, which in this particular case is one, which is winter jacket. And actually, if we go and look at our department's items linking table, we can see that we actually have a match here between department ID 4 and item 1004, which is the winter jacket. So it's added that it's added that item to that store. It's added that pair to our linking table. So we saw about add item to department, which is the that script that's going to has those drop-down boxes, allows us to add the item to the store and calls that new add item to department function. Department.php is going to make use of, for example, the get department function, which is going to allow us to, well, actually, when we click on our winter clothes department, that's what's going to allow us to pull up a department and then be able to output a row for each item in the department. So that's going to make use of the get department function. Our store.php page is going to use the get departments function, which allows us to get an array of all of the departments in the store. And then our admin header.html has also been updated so that it calls this new get departments method so that it can output the links on the side. Additionally, our output department selector method, static method in the output class, which is used to output the drop-down box to select a department on our admin store, has been updated to use this new get departments method to load all the departments from the database. And then just wanted to mention that because all of our data now, as far as the store is concerned right now, has been moved into a MySQL database, it's out of our flat file system, we can get rid of departments.txt, and then we can also get rid of filelib.php, which basically all of that contained in our last version was functions related to getting a department, seeing if a department exists, adding an item to a department. Those have all been moved out, so file.lib.php is gone. So now we've moved all of our item and department functionality or content into our database, and our store is just running solely on MySQL database right now as opposed to a combination of flat files and database. So thank you for watching today's lesson. Look forward to seeing you next time.